Hello, my name is Madrigal. I'm a medical student at UW. I'm working with Wisconsin Voices for Recovery to bring you Saturday Night Chat, which is a monthly chat that creates a space for people to share the recovery journey and to show people in and seeking recovery that they're not alone and recovery is possible. So today we'll be hearing from Jamie. Jamie, thank you so much for joining Saturday Night Chat.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks.
So I thought we could just start out with Jamie, you could share kind of your recovery story.
Okay. Let's see. I guess I would say that my recovery journey kind of started about 22 or so years ago. But then definitely had kind of a level up around 10 years ago. Um, I was in my early 20s and had really kind of gotten pretty deeply immersed in misusing substances and alcohol. Really to date myself, it was the 90s. I was a big part of the rave scene, and not to blame raves by any means, um, but that was really where a lot of exposure, not only to drug use, but also just social exposure was happening for me in my life, which was that social exposure could be really anxiety provoking for me. As we're sort of laughing about a few minutes ago, I'm an introvert, and so that combined with kind of a lifelong, to that point, struggle with anxiety, um, kind of kind of primed my reaching out for substances to sort of support me in those social situations. And then also became aware of how much substances and alcohol could really help quiet some of the internal mental health struggles I was having during that time. Um, I don't think it was a super mature awareness at that time. It was kind of like, oh, wow, this is helpful. I'll do more. Um, and so it was around that same time that I was first becoming diagnosed with some mental health conditions. And the combination of kind of all of those factors, as well as starting to really grow as an adult in my understanding of some of the trauma experiences that had happened in childhood and then into my adult years. um, I started to become aware that I was struggling. I had some problems going on. Um, I gosh, I'm not really sure where to prong off from here because there's a lot of different places I could go, but I guess I'll fast forward a little bit, but feel free to ask me to fill in blanks. That era in my early 20s, I noticed that I was really heading down some dark paths. I was doing some really awesome work. I was working in harm reduction. I'm really proud of that time and the work that we were doing. And at the same time, I was kind of falling apart personally. And I had made some decisions to leave where I was living, come back to Wisconsin, and kind of get well. And that launched a long period of abstaining from substances and struggling with alcohol use on and off. Um, and then during those years into my 20s and 30s, my mental health really started to fall apart. And I remember there were some times when I thought I'm not really drinking, in the times I wasn't drinking. I'm not using any drugs anymore. Why am I such a mess? And um I still struggled quite a bit. I had been diagnosed in my early 20s and still carry the diagnosis of bipolar disorder. It's now type 1. I have had several full manic episodes. I do live with psychosis. And the the kicker of anxiety, and then have in the past been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. And so those difficulties were really, it was kind of like this constant like push and pull. And often instead of doing anything to really kind of help myself be healthier, I'd resort back to the use of some, often alcohol, um, just to kind of dull, to escape sometimes. just to get a break from the internal struggles. And then, so there was some, stuff in the intervening time, but about 10 years ago, I found myself in a pretty tough situation I had gotten myself into and was I was experiencing a violent, intimate partner relationship, and associated with that had really neglected my own self-care and um, experienced what so far, fingers crossed, has been my last mental health crisis. Um, and that was it was around 9 or 10 years ago. And I had actually resorted back to some of the misuse of alcohol during that time. And I don't know, like, if some people, if you've experienced this, or some people listening might have experienced something that's called the dark night of the soul, if that's like anything that's familiar to you at all.
I've never heard
I,
of it.
I had never either, except during that time. I had been practicing meditation and yoga with a local teacher, and he kind of contextualized what was happening to me as something that's referred to in a number of different spiritual circles as a dark night of the soul. And it was sort of this like reckoning of like all the crap, all the stuff, all the just how did I get here? What have I done? What has happened to me? What has been done to me, and how do I get out of this? How do I heal? So that was that period 10 years ago where I remember this like very intentional thought of I have no idea what I'm going to do next, but I know it's not going to be any of this anymore. And so, as is kind of a theme in my life, I moved back to Wisconsin again to try to get healthier, reconnect with family, and try to rebuild relationships that have been broken during that time, and just take better care of myself. And that was like a significant turning point in my life, was just kind of looking around at just all this damage that had happened, and despite feeling like I was kind of getting healthier, and then just having like the bottom drop out again. And um just made this very intentional choice that I'm just not going to live like this anymore. I have to figure out how to take better care of myself, and so that I don't keep having to return to choices that dull or mask or bring me an escape from painful life circumstances inside and outside. Um, Maybe I can pause there. Maybe we can all catch our breath.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm thinking a lot about like it seems like turning point, like decision points. I mean, we all have them at various points in our lives, but in like recovery journeys, there's usually multiple. And
Mhm.
like, I don't know what you like make of all of your turning points, but it seems like, we remember these like really intense periods of our lives.
Mhm.
And then um, often we remember the ones where we made the choice that sent us in a different direction, which is what it sounds like you
Yeah,
experience.
for sure. Yeah, I think there have been those turning points, those positive turning points. And then there's also been the turning points that happened before that, where it was like, there tough situation happening, brain craziness or life craziness, whatever it was. And then there's like, maybe there's not two paths, but there's many paths ahead of us. And that turning point could be towards something that brings more well-being, or that turning point can be something that brings us towards more ill-being. And I definitely chose those ill-being adventures quite a bit. um, but fortunately also, as many of us do experience, lots of opportunity to choose the well-being path as well.
We in medicine, one of the things that we talk a lot about is with, trying to abstain from things, be it alcohol, nicotine, anything.
Mhm.
Often it takes many tries. It takes a lot of persistence and many of those turning points over and
Mhm.
over. So, but I'm hearing that like reflected in your story that your recovery journey started a long, long time ago. Well, I don't want
Mhm.
to say too
It was a
long, but
long time ago.
your recovery journey started years before you had what that like 10-year ago turning point where things really gain traction.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that was, I mean, I think a lot of us, I don't know. I'm stubborn. I've heard I'm stubborn since I was, a little kid. And sometimes it's not a superpower and sometimes it is. And I've experienced that when I really choose something intentionally, it happens. And I think there's a lot of us that's true for. And I've seen that a lot in my peer support work, and then just as a human living on the planet. Like so many of us, we just kind of get pulled around by forces in life or habitual choices or just the stuff that's like aided us to a point and now maybe no longer serves us, and then we like make this decision like it's I'm going to do this way, and then we're like off and running, and it's that journey of well-being gets launched. And it's cool when I get to see that in other people, and I think it's definitely been true in my own life.
I wanted to ask more about kind of catching up to now with your current role doing peer support things.
Mhm.
And I was wondering about like hearing you were doing some like harm reduction work in the 90s, but personally, we're going through a lot. And
Mhm.
it made me think about how, a lot of people in helping professions can have like terrible mental health, terrible physical health, like
Mhm.
really putting other people before themselves and kind of letting their own health and wellness kind of go to the wayside. I'm
Mhm.
wondering if there's like a contrast there between like some of the work you were doing when you were doing a lot of helping work, but not really prioritizing your own wellness, and the work that you're doing now in peer support that seems to be more like, I don't know, like if it's more fulfilling, more satisfying, or you're able to have
Mhm.
more of that wellness for yourself.
Wow, there's a lot there. Yes, yes, no, and yes, I guess. I don't know. I I think I've come to a point in my own journey where I know that I only have to give what's already inside me. Things I've learned or experienced, or things that I aren't just an intellectual knowing, but are like an embodied awareness, or a truly experienced I don't know what the word is I'm looking for. I think in the past I often pointed at something and said, you should do this. um, Harm reduction, especially in the ways that I was involved, and the roots of that practice of harm reduction back then was still very, there's still quite a bit of mutuality, very pure rooted, lots of pure work ethic, of this is for all of us, from all of us. And it wasn't standing on a hill and pointing down and saying, I know what's best for you. It was absolutely about trying to save each other's lives and help us be a little safer in our exploration of substance use and things like that. I think that has carried through. I think if I hadn't experienced that, I wouldn't be a peer support. I mean, it definitely planted the seeds, for me, for sure, was that harm reduction work. But that being said, I think what you said is very accurate anyway. That I decided to go into peer support work very intentionally back in around 2017, and then started the process in 2018, because not because I felt like I was so recovered that I had things to teach people, but because I didn't want anyone else to have to be alone in their journey and in their struggles, because I had experienced pretty late in life what it was like to really feel truly supported and validated, by people who really understood what I was going through and what each other were going through. And I wish that I had been able to experience that earlier in life. And I thought, if I can get through this and I can get healthy enough that I can be strong and share this with other people, and maybe be that, like, I don't know, that trusted witness on somebody's journey, then maybe they won't have to suffer as long either. And so that has really been something that keeps me very honest in my recovery and in I mean, both mental health and substance and alcohol use. For me now, recovery isn't necessarily about abstention. It's really about what, like, just a healthier relationship with everything in life. I mean, there's so many things that we can become addicted to that we can't avoid, that we can't abstain from. I mean, probably I'll be honest, probably one of my biggest addiction struggles now is food. I still struggle with not eating mindfully, and I can't just not eat food. So I have to develop a healthier relationship with that. But
Hmm.
not only for me, but also because I'm a peer support. It's not that I'm expected to be perfect, or I expect myself to be perfect, but I kind of have to walk my talk a little bit more now. Um,
Hmm.
because it's truly just from, like, I only can share what I experience. So that's a really long answer to your question, but I hope it was okay.
No, that's perfect. Yeah, I think, you talked about the role of like chronic mental illness, and it seems like recovery, mental illness, and substance, like it's the same thing. It's the
Hmm.
same process. There's no difference there, and it's really based in healing,
Hmm.
just generally.
Yeah,
Um,
that's for sure been true for me. It wasn't like I could just, I'm not going to drink alcohol for the rest of my life. Now my life has evolved, and it feels healthy and well. And it's, or I'm just going to take my medication and the bipolar is going to be quiet and I'm never going to struggle again. I mean, it's, for some people, those experiences do happen, those things that we can pluck out in isolation and say, this is the problem and I'm going to just stop it. But that hasn't been true for me. My journey has been a very intertwined one. And so it's really, for me, and I think I can go out on a limb and say, like, for a lot of us, that it isn't just about let's get sober from something, or let's take a pill, or let's go to therapy. It's like this holistic, create, like, cultivating a life that we don't feel like we have to escape from, or I don't know, just cultivating a life that, like, draws from our own inner goodness and our own inner wisdom, and then we don't have to make as many tough choices about how to feel better in our lives. There's enough that happens to us that we can't control. We don't we keep piling on all the other stuff that we can control to some extent, like, then absolutely we're gonna engage in some of those things that cause more harm to us.
yeah. Um, my seeing my partner is in early recovery, and like I think that she's going through the dark night of the soul that you're describing. She's like reckoning with everything, and it's so, I mean, we're both kind of facing the world together at this moment, but it's amazing how tied together everything is. Like you're
Hmm.
saying, it's like one thing connected to the next, and you really have to go past all of the surface level problems into what has really, yeah, like what you can control, going back to that. Um, Kind of in that vein, um, I know you practice like mindfulness, Buddhist meditation,
Hmm.
and I really wanted to hear just more about that and how that's been instrumental in your recovery.
Sure. I even wore my t-shirt for the occasion.
Perfect.
um so Buddhism is something that has kind of like, it's sort of like showed up on my path a lot of different ways throughout my life. I mean, all the way back, well, not so much Buddhism as a child, but meditation as a child. My grandmother, who passed when I was in high school, she used to share guided meditations with me when I was a kid, because I couldn't sleep. I've struggled with insomnia, I think, my whole life, as far back as I can recall. And when I often spent time at my grandparents' house and as a kid, and she would play these guided meditations for me to help me sleep. And um so meditation and then Buddhism on its heels sort of kept like sort of pinging on my radar throughout my life. And I'm not historically a deeply spiritual person, and was pretty anti-established religion for a lot of my life. And then I was again around 10 years ago when I referenced a little bit ago the yoga and meditation center that I had started attending. This is when I lived in Massachusetts, and um, everywhere I went for probably close to a year, and I mean every like coffee shops, my then partner's therapist office, hospital, like I kept seeing this business card for this yoga teacher at this place in the North Shore of Massachusetts, not far from where I lived. And it just kept showing up and showing up. And I finally was like, well, I think I'm supposed to call this guy. And I called him, and um, I was particularly interested in this certain style of yoga therapy that he practices. And um, so I ended up meeting him, and that began a year and a half or so of what at that point was pretty intense yoga therapy, as well as participating in meditation, Buddhist meditation, and then learning more about mindfulness practice. And I feel like there are many ways that teacher and that center and then that practice really saved me in that time, but it also became something that's just a foundational building block in my life. Like I kind of credit for myself at this time medication, um therapy, and then mindfulness and meditation as like that foundation that I have to have on board, because without those three building blocks for myself, things get really unstable. I'm not able to access my higher level skills. Um and so over the years since then, I've kind of, as I am with a lot of things, kind of been in and out with meditation, learning about Buddhism, really kind of pushing away the spiritual aspect of things and just coming at it as a like this is a tool. Um and yet the spiritual aspect has deepened for me as well in the last handful of years. And um I I think that one of the biggest lessons that I've learned from that part of my life, from Buddhism and from meditation and mindfulness, is that all that we need is already within us. We have so much goodness and we have so much wisdom and insight, but it gets obscured. And any practice, I don't care what it is, anything that in a healthy way turns us more inward, and not an egotistical way, but in a really honest way, to really be able to look inside at what's happening and be able to look with honesty outside at what's happening, is it's just essential to healing, to living well, to recovery. um People come at it in different ways. These practices just happen to finally resonate with the ones that resonate with me. um I've since become a meditation teacher, and then I recently completed the first portion of training as a trauma sensitive mindfulness practitioner. um and I don't foist it upon anybody, but when people are interested in learning about it, I'm like really excited to be able to share with people about meditation and mindfulness, because I just think it's so key to just greater awareness, and really relearning what is it like to feel safe, what is it like to feel healthy, what does feeling unsafe feel like, knowing our red flags, or knowing, I don't know, we just we all all humans, I think, so easily live from a habit mind, and when we can break out of that cycle, it just gives us the greatest chance possible for living well.
Yeah, that's very powerful and like yeah, the from like my knowledge of like the medical side of things as well, like there's and it doesn't in my opinion, like evidence doesn't matter for the individual person. Like every person is like a cosmos unto themselves. And
Mm,
so like a
hmm.
paper that somebody wrote isn't a end all be all, but because it's what I think makes the world of medicine go round, like evidence of mindfulness is like overwhelmingly
Hmm.
positive and has effects on everything, like not
Yes.
only, mental health, but lots of lots and lots of physical health conditions. Like our mind body connection is so strong and I think so like artificially separated in the world
Hmm.
of like Western medicine.
Yes.
Um, but like, yeah, I think it's something that everyone could do more of,
Hmm.
and it's just like such a powerful tool that we don't need to go anywhere to access. It's
Hmm.
side of us. Incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. I like that it's a such a powerful tool that we don't have to go anywhere to access. And I think the other side of that is that it is a very powerful tool. And so it isn't I think it's right for everybody, but it's not always right for everybody at all times. There were times in my life, there's still times in my life. My wife will say like, "You doing okay? Do you maybe you need to meditate a little bit?" And I'm like, there are times where I still have to go, I can't. It's being even closer in here right now, it doesn't feel like a safe place. Um, so there have been times in my life where if I had had mindfulness introduced to me, it probably would have just, forgive me for this saying, but probably would have blown my mind, but not in a good way, in a bad way. Um, but just like all powerful tools, right? Like there's
Mm,
there's a time and a place and a setting for all tools. So yeah.
yeah. One other thing that we could talk about is you kind of mentioned like obviously you're a peer support special like you're a peer support specialist and
Mhm.
you know being and in your past with harm reduction like being in community with other people is like a huge factor. Um, but you didn't recover inside traditional recovery communities.
Right.
Um, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that. Basically, like a lot of people find recovery through recovery communities. A lot of people
Hmm.
don't find like they find recovery through other means. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I assume you like work through with some people who are going through community based and some people who aren't.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I do. And I used to tell people, like when I first started being more out about my story, because I used to work in human resources, right before I decided made this career choice to go into peer support work. And so I had lots of interaction with lots of people, and often lots of people who were struggling. And um, when I started to out myself a little bit more about my recovery or about my mental health or my mental health recovery, I often would say, especially if someone asked, well, what did you use to recover? Oh, you must have done a 12-step program. Which one? And I'd say I didn't. But I wouldn't recommend doing what I did. And then that I kind of have changed my mind about that in the last couple of years. Not that I recommend everybody just white knuckle through their recovery without any formal community supports, but just that that's just as valid a recovery path as anybody else's. And um, there was nothing wrong with that recovery path. There were times, especially in hindsight, I probably would have done better with some sort of more formal community aspect, whether it was actually a recovery community or just something. I kind of can be a bit of a lone wolf, in general. But that being said, I think there's so much power in recovery communities, whether they be 12-step oriented, smart recovery, faith-based recovery systems, things like that. But there's also power in people just figuring out what they need and just doing it and just testing the waters. And community can be found in so many places, that have to do with recovery and that don't. And I think that, there is no wrong way to recover. It's always up to somebody's individual choice. And in my work, I just support people to make whatever choice it is they're making. And if it's 12 step based, great. Is it working for you? Awesome. Is it not? Okay, well then, do you want to look at other recovery systems? Is it maybe just about finding a different recovery home or going to a different meeting, or um and then the people who don't recover within a recovery community organization, like, one of the biggest things is I talk with people about how are you going to connect? How are you going to build a healthier community around you? Because a lot of times, if we're struggling in alcohol or substance use, it's often because of what's around us isn't always the healthiest. It doesn't mean everything is unhealthy, but it, it's common that a lot of what else is going on is really causing a lot of difficulty. So then it's really just about how are you gonna find those supports that do lift you up, and possibly have to rebuild a different social system or social network and things like that. I think if I had to do it all over again, um, I don't know that I would do much different in my own personal recovery. I would probably allow myself to connect with people more, especially in the more vulnerable times in my life. I do tend to isolate. I think a lot of us, I've seen a lot of us, we isolate when we're feeling vulnerable or we're struggling. And those are the times when we really need people the most a lot. And that is one of the really nice things that I've seen be so powerful in people's lives with 12-step programs, is that you don't get lost too far away because somebody's going to reach out to you. Somebody's going to notice, you've got your sponsor, or even just like fellow group members or community members are going to reach in and find you, and pick you up. And I think that's a real strength in those communities.
Yeah. It seems like recovery can be a very isolating experience. Like you were talking
Mhm.
about, like sometimes when the people around you, like it's not a good situation for recovery, or even just like if the people around you don't have any experience with it, that
Mhm.
is also extremely isolating. And that seems to be kind of the one of the huge strengths of communities, but like you said, can be found in kind of anywhere if you really intentionally look for it. Is you can find people that you who see you for, who you are and
For sure.
support you.
Yep, most definitely. I think the other piece of what's so important about, the change in my own tone about, like, yeah, I recovered on my own, but I don't recommend that. And instead turning that into, yeah, I recovered on my own, and that's a possibility. That is an option. Is that more formal recovery community type of support doesn't resonate with everybody. And it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with it. It's just we're each unique individuals, and things connect with us in different ways and at different times. And I've sometimes seen, the lack of availability or exposure to any other way to recover other than 12 step be a deterrent for people. Oh, I don't like this meeting, or it just doesn't, the language doesn't connect with me, so I guess I just can't recover. And that's obviously an overgeneralization, but I think it's, we're we're talking more and more and more over the years about the many pathways of recovery, but I think that sometimes it's hard to actualize that, especially in smaller communities where predominantly the recovery supports are 12-step oriented. Um, I hope that one of the things I'm able to bring to people in my peer support work is the awareness that if that doesn't connect with you, that doesn't mean you can't recover. It just means you just look for a different way to recover or create it yourself, like I did.
Yeah. I feel like that kind of resonates with the tenets of harm reduction too,
Hmm.
of like there isn't one right thing to do. There is how do we keep each other safe? And that can look a lot of ways.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah, I really do agree with you. Uh,
Um, oh yeah, so that kind of leads into so some of your current work is you work in peer support outside of big cities,
mhm.
um, which is pretty few and far between, and
Mhm.
are trying to get that resource out to more people. I was wondering if you could just talk about what it's like doing this kind of work outside of like a major metropolitan center.
Mhm. Yeah, so I started in Milwaukee and between my own personal journey and then just being part of a team that was just making such an impact on people's lives through peer work, I recognized, well, and then also noticing most of the peer support, not all of it, but a lot of the concentration of peer support is around the like more populated areas of the state. Milwaukee, of course, Madison area, La Crosse area, and there's this great um, peer work community up in the northwest part of the state as well. And but in between, it's a lot less, and in some areas none. Um, and so I just um, during COVID, not being, very gratefully not being directly harmed by the pandemic, financially, health wise, and things like that. It kind of became a period of, I've noticed it being kind of for a lot of us, a period of sort of contemplation and like, what am I really doing? And I just thought if I can take my knowledge and experience and bring it into areas where not that there isn't that knowledge and experience lacking, but there just isn't the resource there. Maybe I can help pave the way for making peer support more viable in some areas where it's maybe hasn't gotten as much off the ground. And so that I did form Fusion Collaborative a couple of years ago, and then started meeting with representatives from different counties around the state to talk about what are the needs, just what are the needs happening, especially regarding mental health and trauma recovery, because that's the key place I practice from in peer support. um and how could peer support meet those needs? And so I, through a series of kind of weird events, I met someone who lived in my neighborhood actually, who works in Sheboygan County, and became a connecting point, and we decided to start peer support here in Sheboygan County, where I now live, and with my wife. And um, there is some peer support that happens here, and they have had peer supports in the past, but again, just not a large amount of it happening, especially considering the relative size of this broader area. Um, it's been interesting. Sometimes being an outsider is really beneficial. This is an area with really deep roots and families who have been here for generations. And it's a being a somewhat smaller community, especially smaller than Milwaukee, where I'm originally from. Um, almost everybody knows each other in some way. There's like maybe 2 or 3 degrees of separation
Hmm.
amongst people, and so in some ways it's been beneficial to have an outside perspective and not be so interconnected with people and families. And on the other hand, sometimes it's been a challenge for sure. You know, who's this person who just came from? Where are you from? Why are you up here? um, but the cool thing in this community, and I think it's true for a lot of smaller communities, is that there's so much desire to for people to be well. And there's already so much work. It might not be like there's a great volume of peer support work. But there's so much just work being done and to lift people up. Um, and so I've been um, making a better effort to come out from the shadows and network with other organizations and people and just figure out how we can kind of strengthen each other and support people who are also working on a recovery or our mental health journey. Um, I do a lot of work currently that's community based. I meet people for peer support work, whether it's at their homes, somewhere in the community, sometimes here at my office. I work with people who I have heard from them, they've been told they're untreatable. I've been I've had people say thank you for not being afraid of me. Um, it's been really humbling experience to um, be trusted by people who, you know, to do peer support work in their lives when they've been told things like that they're scary, that they don't belong, that they're untreatable. And um, I don't know, I could go on and on about that forever, but that's a lot of my work here. And I noticed I went through CCAR recovery coach certification early this year because I guess it took an anvil to knock me on the head or something. I recognized like there's really no unentwining. You know, like I've talked about my own journey and stuff. There's I'm working with somebody to support them through like their mental health and their trauma recovery, and they also have difficulty with substances or alcohol. Yes, they can absolutely work with other people or not work with anybody at all about that piece, but it's very hard to like just shut that off and only look at the other stuff or only support someone from one angle. And the really raw phase of my own recovery is long enough now that it was different. I didn't have a difficulty with opiates. I was not a needle drug user. So there's some things that are a lot more dominant, especially in this part of the state with drug use that were not part of my journey. And so I did go through recovery coach certification earlier this year to just strengthen some of that, to be able to meet people where they're at holistically a little better than without that training. Um, so that's increasingly a piece of what I do too.
Incredible. Yeah, it sounds like I there's people in recovery everywhere, and the fact that, you know, resources are concentrated on big areas um,
Mm.
is, you know, kind of a fact of just the ecosystem that we live in. But it sounds like you and the people that you work with are all doing some really incredible work.
Yes, there's a lot of great work being done here, and just great recovery resources, and um, there's a lot here. So it was a little you know, I took this approach of I'm going to see how I can bring peer support to more under-resourced areas, and then come in like, here I am, super peer supporter, and then and really, I guess again, humbling. Like, there's all kinds of it happening here. It's just packaged differently, maybe. Um, you know, there's still a lot of opportunity and a lot of need to be met, and I do believe strongly that a lot of that need can be met through peer support work. It is certainly not to underplay what already exists here, because this is a cool community with a lot of stuff going on to help people out.
I think that that really that mirrors a lot of you know, healthcare and medical training, there's a lot of that balance too between I'm gonna help I'm gonna help everybody. I know exactly what I'm doing and I'm gonna help
Hmm.
everybody. And then getting into, whether I'm just getting into clinic now at this phase of my training or people moving to different parts of the world
Hmm.
where you get somewhere and you realize like, oh, I'm just a person and I'm just a person trying to connect with other people.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And I probably have far more to learn than I have to teach anybody else. Yeah.
yeah, I've been having a very um like some revelations around going into clinic, and I've always been like I don't really like clinic. I like the more, glamorous stuff, the bloody stuff, but
Yeah.
I just did a geriatrics rotation and like realized like I learned so much in each half-hour appointment from every patient I talk to, even if it's just about like the proper way to care for African violets, that it's like
Yes.
there's so much joy to be found in even places that you thought that you were the one bringing value to
Yes.
encounter. Yeah.
That's so true. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's so true. You had asked a question, or when we initially met to kind of talk about this interview and about like if you could go back and tell yourself something in early recovery or something like that. And I think what you just talked about is probably one of the key things that I would tell myself, that like I just that we can learn something from everything and everybody, but we just have to be open to it and then apply it. I guess that's another piece. I probably learned all kinds of stuff. You're probably learning all kinds of things too, but then applying it, not just going, wow, that's cool, and then moving on. Applying it is so important. And yeah, I think I guess this is a little tangent, but still related to like what I would tell myself in the past, like that piece of gratitude. There were a lot of people, I wouldn't, well, I guess there weren't a lot of people, but there were people who helped me a lot throughout my life. And I remember I was in this partial hospitalization program following my last or during my last crisis. And one of the groups I went to was on gratitude. And I remember being very eye rolly and like, okay, here we go. And we did this writing exercise. And I don't remember what the writing prompt was anymore, but I was journaling about gratitude. And just through the process of contemplating and writing, I realized embarrassingly late in life that gratitude isn't thank you. Gratitude is taking the gift that someone's given you, that support they're offering or that tip on African violets or whatever it may be, and then applying it, then using that, going forward with what they've given you. Um, Not just like, oh hey, thanks for helping me out, and then fall down that dark hole all over again. So I wish I could take those two lessons and give them to like 20-year-old me, because that might have saved me a lot of grief.
I it sounds like, and I think this is really on the nose, is that like gratitude and like similar to mindfulness, like it's not something that you'd like do as an activity
Mhm.
for 15 minutes and then go from there. It's a practice. It's carrying forward these things and bringing them into other parts of your life that really like allows one to use them to like achieve wellness.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's something that I don't know. I mean, at this stage of my life, like I'm like being able to be a supporter of others, maybe more than like that dynamic has been able to shift a little bit. Like, I mean, I certainly exist by the grace of the support of many people still, but just that dynamic has shifted a little bit, and I get to support others, and I think that's a part of like that well-being or recovery journey that can get hard for the carer on the other side, you know, watching our loved ones or the people we're working in support of or whatever, like knowing that they've got that wisdom in there, they've had that lesson, or they've listened to the whatever feedback, and then fall down again. And but that's, I guess, where we just get to respect it. Everybody's journey happens in our own time and in our own ways, and yep.
Well, I think that there's one other question that I think would be a great wrap-up question.
Sure.
Um, and that would be, and I think you've touched on a lot of this so far, but what the most fulfilling parts about being in this stage of your recovery that you're in now are.
Mm. I think the thing that underpins everything else I could possibly say is being able to really be present and really show up to my life now. Um, which supports me to continue to make the choices to cultivate that life that I want to show up for, not a life that I am ashamed of or a life that has given me shame. Yeah, I definitely think the most rewarding part is like being able to be present and also being able to be present in the mess that still happens. You know, life, it's not perfect for any of us, but the fact that like when things get hard, my first thought anymore is not I'm gonna just go buy a bottle or I'm just gonna have a drink or I'm gonna see what I can buy from my friend. Like it's not that anymore. Sometimes it's in there somewhere in the list of things of the, you know, the menu of problem solving options. Sometimes it still shows up in my mind, but it's not the first anymore. The first is always like, okay, how can I get through this? How can I cope? What are my skills? Who are the people who love me that are around me? Um, so yeah, that's really rewarding. And then the rest is like, I mean, I get to be a wife. I get to have a wife. Like I have a life that I love and family and friends that I love and that love me. And they've always been there, but our relationships were hard because I was really deeply struggling. And they were too. Some of them do deeply struggle as well or have. And that's so rewarding is really just feeling connected to my life and being connected to people that I love and that love me. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's an incredible note to end on. Yeah, I'm so grateful that we were able to sit down and do this.
Me too.
And
Thank
I
you so
feel like
much.
I've learned a lot and I'm going to try to, like you said, try to take it with me.
Me too. And I'll probably remember some of it, but maybe not all of it. I'll probably fall in a hole somewhere along the way.
Yeah. Well, great. I think thank you so much for your time and
Thank
we'll
you.
wrap up. Take care.
Sounds good.